Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and this week's plant of the week is Monstera deliciosa. This houseplant is commonly referred to as a plethora of names, but the one I think you're most often going to hear it as is the Swiss cheese plant, as you can understand why from the visual effect that these leaves have. It's also referred to as the breadfruit plant or the split-leaf philodendron, even though this is technically not a philodendron, but it's very closely related to a philodendron. It is also in the Araceae family of plants and is therefore considered an aroid, so I understand why it's mistakenly referred to as such. This is native to like southern Mexico all the way down through Central America, like to Panama, where this grows in the rainforest. And this, in its natural habitat, will kind of creep along the forest floor until it finds a surface, usually a tree trunk, to grab onto, and will climb up that surface. And the higher it climbs up that surface, it will grab onto with the aerial roots, and its leaves will become more developed and mature, and they will get even larger. They can be multiple feet across, and they will just be completely covered in these like serrated edges. And the holes inside the leaves, these are referred to as fenestrations. So it is quite something to behold. If you are in a tropical area or a botanical garden, if you see these, they're usually going to be really, really nice specimens. They get to be quite monstrous, hence the name Monstera. This is one I've grown in my home for, believe it or not, like 5 years at this point. I did like cut it back and propagate it and like redo it. So this isn't 5 years of growth right here, but it is a plant that I've had for a decent amount of time for somebody at my age. But I really just enjoy the presence that it has in my home. But I do need to make it clear that when you bring one of these into your home, you need to make sure that you have the space for it. I am struggling to find the space for this thing right now in my home. As when you purchase them, they might be a little bit more tame inside the planter, but after a couple years go by, these things grow exponentially, and you're going to need to make sure that you have the space for it. You can kind of train them a little bit to keep them inside the planter. Like I have a bamboo stick holding mine in place. I know you can't really see because my plant's too big, and I have it sitting on a stool here so that you can actually see the foliage of my plant. But just something to bear in mind, you really do need to make sure that you're going to have space for a plant of this stature. So the care for this houseplant. So the lighting, you do want to give this some rather bright light. I have found the best luck with this houseplant if I'm growing it like very close to like a west or south facing window. In my home now, I'm doing east facing windows, which is working fine. But you do need to be mindful to keep them in the general vicinity of the windows. When I first got my Monstera and I brought it home, I pushed it back like maybe 8 feet from a south facing window, mind you, but it still just wasn't cutting it. And what you'll normally find happen with your Monsteras if you're subjecting them to too low light is their leaves will quite literally regress in their like maturity. They will shrink in size, they will stop developing splits or develop less splits until maybe they stop developing them entirely. And it's just kind of sad. I know you want these plants to look like the gimmicky split leaf philodendron, Monstera, whatever you want to call it. Those Swiss cheese leaves that this plant is famous for and why it's so popular on the internet. So if you are struggling with that, perhaps in your home, I would recommend increasing the light, but if you're just bringing one in your home, give it some really bright light. A south-facing window, like growing it inside the window, is viable, even a west-facing window, but you probably will need to acclimate it to that space. If you just put this right in like a super bright south-facing window where you will grow like your cacti, it will burn. The foliage will burn, but if you're able to kind of like slowly subject it to that light levels and then kind of get the foliage to adjust, it will grow very, very well. Or if the leaves do burn, if you do make that mistake or had made that mistake before, the new leaves that come in will likely be already acclimated to that sunlight setting. So just something to keep in mind there. Not all hope is lost, but bright light is really important, is what I'm trying to stress. There is too bright of light, but usually these plants are able to acclimate to the brightest of light, at least in my own experience. But that is just the most important thing that I'm trying to get across here. If you want your leaves to be big and beautiful, you need to give this thing enough light. You can't just throw it in the corner in your home and expect it to do phenomenally, unless it's acclimated to that space. Same with the bright light, you probably would be able to acclimate it to lower light, but you really do have to let it settle into that. So the watering for this houseplant, when you water your Monstera deliciosa, you really want to give them a really, really good soak. These grow in the rainforest where it's raining a lot when it rains. So these get a really good soaking in their natural habitat. So to kind of recreate those situations, you do want to give your plant a really good soaking. And I do let mine dry out quite a bit. I'm not just letting it like get a little bit moist and then watering it. Like I'm letting it dry out, like not quite 100%, but at least 50%, usually 75%. Like I'm very lackadaisical when it comes to watering my plants. So I probably let this thing dry out almost completely. You can't see, but it's in a like 10-inch terracotta pot. So it isn't a decent sized planter. It is still terracotta though, so it does suck out some of the moisture. You could plant this in terracotta, you could plant this in ceramic, plastic, whatever you find suitable or works for your aesthetics. Just keep in mind that terracotta dries out quicker, so you'll just have to water it more often than something that is glazed or plastic. And the soil, you do want to give this a good aroid mix. It's not as detrimental as any like funky philodendron that you're growing in your home. Those are a little bit more picky with their soil, but this is a very, very common houseplant. The grower's mix is probably fine, but if you want to be the very best plant parent you can be, it's best to add some perlite or pumice to your mixture, as well as some orchid bark. Some nice thick chunky orchid bark would be great for your Monstera because their roots are very, very chunky. And also some charcoal is great just to keep things kind of clean, particularly if you're working with a larger planter, as you usually will be with a Monstera deliciosa. You will find these young too. They are sold in tiny 4-inch planters, but they will look nothing like this, as their leaves are just going to have this similar shape, but without any of the splits. But if you do purchase one of that size, honestly, give it a couple months and you'll start to get some splits in the leaves. So that's at least got something going for it. If you don't want to shell out the money, which usually you can find these at like a grocery store for probably like $20 in a nice 10-inch planter. But if you go to like a boutique garden store or like a nursery, you're probably going to find some better looking specimens that might cost a little bit more, but they might look much more like you would find growing in the natural habitat. These do totally fine with just like standard household humidity. You don't need to supplement humidity, but you can. Obviously, these are going to appreciate it as they grow in the freaking rainforest in their natural habitat, which is a very humid environment. But these are very common houseplants for good reason, and that's because they're able to withstand the lower to medium humidities that we usually have in our home, particularly in the winter months when the heat kicks on and it dries out our homes a little bit. Some other aroids might really require a higher humidity setting or like a greenhouse kind of recreation, but Monstera deliciosa is not the one that you need to worry about with that. The temperature for this houseplant though, it can handle a pretty wide range. I think you would not want this any lower than like 50, 55 degrees and no higher than like 85, 90 degrees-ish. So like probably like 55 to 85, but I think you can probably get a little leeway with that. This is a pretty easy houseplant to grow. So this is one that you could perfectly put outside in the summer months. In like my area, I live in Philadelphia, so this is one that would handle like late spring, summer, early fall, totally fine outside. In fact, you're probably going to get a lot better growth on it outside as you would inside. But if you do put it outside, just make sure to put it in a shaded area, because as they say, the darkest shade outdoors is brighter than the brightest bright indoors. Is that accurate? I don't know, but that's what they say. As far as the pests go for this houseplant, I have had thrips be kind of a very large nuisance on my Monstera deliciosas before. Usually that problem is stemming from other plants in my home and they just find their way to the Monstera deliciosa. So it's one that with persistence, it's not really an issue, but if you have a thrips problem in your home, be mindful because they might find their way over to your Monstera. Particularly the new leaves is where they're going to wreak the most havoc, especially when they're still unfurling and they're curled up. That's where thrips love to hide. So something to just be wary of. I wouldn't worry about bringing a Monstera into your home and it causing a thrips problem, but if you have found a plant with thrips in your home on it, I would probably just check your Monstera to be sure. And I have plenty of videos about pest management if you need to check those out. Propagating these is very simple and very rewarding. You can propagate this in the same exact method that you would propagate a standard golden pothos or like a heartleaf philodendron, just from stem cuttings. As long as you have some of the node or the aerial roots, which are very pronounced on your Monstera deliciosa, you cannot miss them. You will likely have success. You can put them in water and they'll root up in there. You can even put these right in soil. I've done that before. I think I did a how to propagate Monstera deliciosa video years ago, and I think I put it right in soil and I showed you guys like a month later and it was like entirely rooted inside like a 6-inch planter. So very, very easy to propagate. You should probably wait until the spring or summer months to do your propagating, but this is like a foolproof houseplant that I think you could chop this in the middle of winter and it would probably be fine. It just might take a little bit more time before it puts off new growth in the winter months, as these are, while they are quite vigorous growers, they are much slower growers than many of the other houseplants that we're used to in our home. I usually probably get like 3 or 4 leaves maximum during a growing season. So I have this new one that's coming in right now. This is the first one that this has put off for me in months. So this is like the harbinger of the growing season right here, which is very exciting because, you know, we're entering the spring months soon and I'm excited to watch all of our houseplants start to grow. Speaking of the growing season, you do want to give these some fertilizer, as, like I said, they are quite vigorous growers, albeit slow, but you can just give it a standard houseplant fertilizer. I always cut my fertilizer in half just because too much fertilizer is a problem. You might think it's going to help out your plant, but the leaves are going to burn. And something like this, you want these leaves to just be perfectly green and gorgeous. So cutting it in half is fine, and you can probably feed it like in the summer months, like at least once a month, maybe even like every 2 weeks. So it might be a little too much. I would probably just do it once a month, but these are very vigorous growers. I'm sure they could use a feeding, particularly if you have had your plant in the same soil for over a year. I usually don't fertilize my houseplants until they've been in the same soil for a full growing season, just because fresh soil has a good amount of nutrients in it. Of course, there are houseplants that prefer specific nutrients, and if a Monstera is one of those is beyond me, because this houseplant is so low-key, I've just never bothered doing the research on it. But I just wouldn't worry about it. Standard household fertilizer or houseplant fertilizer is totally fine. And last but not least, I believe, let's talk about repotting this houseplant. You can repot this probably every year and it would be fine, just because these root systems are very vigorous. I would probably, at the minimum, repot this like every 3 years. But I've been repotting mine, I'd say probably every 2 years so far since I got it. So you can ballpark it there. You can do whatever you'd like. This is a very low-key houseplant. I'm sure if you left it in the same planter for like 10 years, it would be totally fine. It's just those roots are going to probably just take up all the space and all the soil will probably be gone by then. These roots are very, very adventurous. And I guess one more thing I should mention, I'm trying to remember to talk about this in these videos, but this is a moderately toxic houseplant. So if you have nippy pets or children, I would reconsider. But like, I have a cat and she does not chew on my plants, so even though this would probably like irritate her tongue or her tummy if she were to chew on it, I don't worry about that because she just simply does not chew on my plants. So just one more thing to bear in mind. Even though, I don't think I mentioned, I think I said at the beginning of this video though, that this houseplant is commonly referred to as the breadfruit plant as one of its names. And that's because this does produce an edible fruit called breadfruit. And I've never tried it. Apparently it just tastes like a tropical fruit, like pineapple-y, mango-y-ish. I don't know. Apparently it also takes like a full year to ripen, which is wild. But that kind of checks out for this houseplant that also takes like a full year to do a lot. It's a vigorous grower, but a slow grower, as I said. I think that is the best way to wear this houseplant. So there you have it, how to care for Monstera deliciosa, the Swiss cheese plant, the breadfruit plant, the split-leaf philodendron, even though it's not a philodendron. So thank you guys so much for joining me. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at phillyfoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys next week for Plant of the Week. Have a great day.